Hello, everybody. I'm back here with Josh Denny. We're going to have a little chat about Gurdjieff and the Gurdjieff work. I've been reading a lot on his Tapestry of Beelzebub blog lately, and you've been uploading lots of stuff. And last night I was reading all about the truth in light, or light and truth. And I thought maybe we could discuss what is the light and this black hole that you discuss as well at one point, or
Yeah,
we could so easily fall into. I've been in a few black holes myself, and they like to keep you pulled in and they try and drag you down with their strange forces, and you have to fight your way out or fill yourself with light so you just lift out. Which do you think?
yeah. Well, definitely. Obviously, it seems to be part of our human condition, doesn't it? That we have ups and downs, and in this sort of strange miracle of being a human being. That I suppose, like even like religious traditions, it's you know, man does seem to be separated out from other beings, whether like animals or even angels. He does tend to be talked about as having something unique about him. Possibly for that nature, that he's probably maybe the only being that we know of that sort of straddles multiple worlds, that he's has an organic, a physical nature, an animal nature, you could call it that way. Also has like a non-physical, perhaps sort of angelic, nature, and maybe even something higher than that, like something directly, from God.
Well, as
So it
David
does seem
Pratchett asked, are we a rising ape or a fallen angel?
yeah, yeah, well, exactly. That's we've got both those, those natures in us, like the animal and the angel. And I would say even something beyond the angel. I guess like with the sort of biblical story, wasn't there? There was like, some of the angels kind of, were sort of shocked that supposedly God gave man, some extra capacities, which like, it's often linked to his capacity to name things. But, so that could be looked at in different ways. But yeah, it does seem to be, there's something unique about being a human then, perhaps in the whole universal reality, that yeah, we do seem to straddle these multiple worlds, physical, non-physical, and maybe like divine. And obviously that gives us some great potentials, extra potentials maybe than any other kind of like being. But also maybe that brings with it the extra problems, that we can probably suffer in ways that maybe an animal can't even suffer, or ways that an angel perhaps couldn't even suffer, because we've got this extra potential, of being human. So definitely, we can fall into, pits and have to like crawl our way out of them, or struggle our way out, or maybe get like divine grace or get helped out of it. But I suppose like in the post that you're talking about, I kind of use the black hole as an analogy or like a metaphor for, I suppose, like you could look at it as the journey of the soul then, or the journey of the human being, in terms of its kind of, well, at least one way of talking about it, it's kind of rising or progression back to the source. That's kind of a fairly common motif within certain like the religious traditions. That in a sense man has been sort of cast out, not necessarily like he's been punished, but just like we say, we've entered into like a material kind of existence, which perhaps is about as far away as we can get from the source, you could say, while still having the chance to return to the source, like consciously. You could say that animals can return to the source in a sense because they've never left it. They don't in a sense suffer this sort of problem of self-consciousness, human consciousness. So again, there
They
are
seem to have
ideas
a
and
different consciousness, don't they, animals? And I often used to debate with people about whether animals have the same kind of soul as us. Where Gurdjieff thought it was very important to work with animals, didn't he? It's how you treat animals shows what
yeah,
kind of person you are. So these animals do need us. And in the Bible, it talks about Adam got the opportunity to name all the animals, so he had power over them. But it wasn't just power; he was supposed to look after them and be like the farmer. Obviously, that could be taken in many different ways.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Again, that similar thing about the human, like the human soul and the human nature, the human spirit. That yeah, at least in terms of consciousness, it seems that man has a different kind, different form of consciousness to animals, and like what you're saying, a different kind of spirit, you could say. Like I suppose there's an idea in one sense that an individual animal, like say a sheep or something, they tend, there's the idea that they tend to be just remain as part of their species. You could say that, like something like the individual consciousness of, let's say, then the sheep, you could say, is kind of governed by the total essence of sheep. You could say, like, you look at the whole essence of sheep as one sort of being with one intelligence, and that sort of kind of manifests itself automatically in the individual instances of sheep. But apparently, like, a difference with man is that in his case, he's not, or at least there's a potential for him to actually be a real individual, like almost like in each man, there's the potential for him to sort of recapitulate or encapsulate the whole sort of human essence, which is kind of maybe like, again, sort of the story of the Christ, that each man has this potential, you could say, to become the whole and to be like a real, unique, sort of creative individual, Whereas, like, say, the sheep might just be an expression of the sheep essence and is kind of governed by those sort of laws at a larger scale, in terms of what its experiences or what it can do. Whereas this, if man's got access to kind of real creativity and true self-consciousness, then he might be able to have a real experience of individuality and some sort of uniqueness to him and some sort of creativity.
So, kind of thing Steiner again talks about. Steiner says that animals have a group consciousness. That's why all the birds can all fly together. That's why all the sheep can work as a herd. But us humans have been given an individual consciousness now in this epoch or era that we're living in, and that's why we are separate from the animals.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's theories that, like, back in our sort of earlier, states of evolution, that perhaps that sort of more kind of group consciousness was present in, like, say, early man, like early sort of hunter-gatherer man maybe functioned more in that kind of way, like maybe the little tribes kind of had this sort of group consciousness and helped them navigate. But again, there's that idea that as we became sort of, evolved towards the modern man, that we've kind of came out of that sort of consciousness, that form of consciousness, into, like, apparently, separate individual consciousnesses. And again, that brings, you could say, the potential for certain kinds of development, but it also brings extra problems, you could say, because there's the greater potential there maybe for, individual men to be at war with each other, because, they feel separate and they're more aware of that sense of, like, this being a separate, isolated individual. So that can breed greater conflict, possibly. In which case, it suggests that in order to, like, maybe continue, you could, like, say, our human evolution, that there's going to have to be some kind of change in the sense how we can live with each other, how we can overcome this apparent form of separation, in our experience, not just a change in, like, our outer society and, like, laws and regulations and stuff, but perhaps another step in evolution in terms of our consciousness, one that maybe we reclaim some of the capacities that we had from the past, like a bit more group consciousness, but it's something that doesn't just render null our individual consciousness, something that can, like, like in the sense of the reconciling force, something that can, transcend both those kind of apparently polar states of individual consciousness and group consciousness, And again, there seems to be, like,
but we're still our individual selves.
Because something that
in unification with people.
Yeah, something that transcends, that kind of either or situation. Like, again, with, like, perhaps another idea of the Christ, like being this expression of what maybe you could say the next step in human evolution could be, but one that transcends, one that can be inclusive, like completely mutual with his brother, like knowing his brother, like, as himself, like as one flesh, you could say, or another son of God. So having some complete mutuality, but also having this, like you're saying, this capacity for individuality at the same time, So again, it kind of, goes beyond our sort of either or general way of thinking about stuff. We can either think of some lack of self-consciousness where there's just, like, humanity operating as one, like you say, maybe one shoal of fish or something, but there's no individual, like, cells there. Or we see it the opposite end of the stick, where everybody just has their own limited, isolated consciousness. So again, something that could possibly transcend, either one of those two apparently opposed options.
But then this is kind of like what the Gurdjieff work is trying to prepare us for, because if we can develop ourselves, then we'll be able to hopefully work with people in a better, more compassionate, and I suppose from the idea of what they call Philadelphic brotherhood or sisterhood, where
Yeah,
brother loves brother, we all respect each other and what we believe, what each person believes in. This is what needs to be happening. Instead, everybody seems to be separating. At the moment, we're in a time of a lot of war going on because everyone, I've had a few people saying to me, if we didn't have religion, we wouldn't have war. Well, it's not as simple as that, is it? It's just a misunderstanding from the religious institutions where if the individual knew how to be more brotherly or sisterly, they wouldn't treat their enemies in that way.
yeah,
And if they
yeah. I mean,
a herd mentality of having to be told to go to war.
yeah, like you said, I mean, religion in itself is, you could say it's just, you could say it's a concept or an idea. It hasn't Religion hasn't done anything. It's like, you could just look at it like a tool, like a hammer. You could use a hammer to beat in a nail, or you could use it to like beat your brother's head in, like Cain and Abel. So that just depends on the nature of the person, doesn't it? Who's using that tool. They could use religion as just another means to separate themselves from other people, and to become more divided, and or just as a means to control people or whatever. Again, that would just kind of depend on the nature of the people who are engaging with it. But definitely, like, yeah, the idea with the work, not just obviously the Gurdjieff work, but the different religious traditions, there's that idea that man does have this higher potential in him, for, let's say, that transformation, and that it does appear that man is not born, like, transformed. He's not born perfected, then, like, not born complete, and that transformation seems to be something that can happen through the course of his life, like his physical life. And again, the traditions would suggest that even beyond his physical life, that there can be evolution or transformation in his kind of his consciousness. And with the Gurdjieff work in particular, then again, Gurdjieff talks about the different bodies that man has or can have. That he has his physical body, which has its own associated kind of mode of consciousness. You could say its own kind of experience that the physical body has, or the physical mind has. It has a certain way of, you could say, looking at things, a certain world that it occupies. And then he has the second body, which he calls the Keston body, which is also kind of like the astral body. So again, that body would have a different kind of, you could say, a different kind of mind, a different kind of consciousness. And again, if your experience was more centered in that body or that world, then yeah, your experience will be different. The way you see things will be different. Again, he talks about the different bodies in different worlds. So depending on what kind of body you're in, you could say, or what body your experience is centered in, then yeah, the world that you perceive will be, radically different. And then beyond the Keston body, he talks about third body being the soul body, be different, different again. But in terms of like his scheme of development, he says that yeah, apparently most people don't really have those two higher bodies developed. They're in a state of sort of latency, or like they're at the level of a child, you could say, or like an embryo or something. They're not developed, and they're not operating to the capacity that they have. And that, he says, has a big impact on the way that collective life goes. Because if, the people in general are living just sort of in the physical body then, or with that physical body and that kind of physical mind as their main, their main means of consciousness, the main way that they perceive the world and other people, then obviously that's going to have a big impact on collective life. And he says again that the physical nature is more kind of closer to the animal nature, like what we were saying before. Obviously there is a difference between a human body and an animal body, but nevertheless it obviously has a lot in common with an animal body because it's of an organic nature. And like in his terminology of different worlds, he would say that the physical body occupies one world, you could say the physical world, and it has certain laws that go with that world. And so if man's consciousness is just centered in that sort of level, that's the dictating body or consciousness that dictates his action and his perception of the world, then you could say that yeah, it's probably always going to cause problems, or more problems than necessary or needed, because he's living under more, in a more constricted kind of world, more constricted form of consciousness than is possible for him. So again, Gurdjieff talks about the work in terms of developing these other bodies, or developing our contact with them, or developing the form of consciousness that goes with those higher bodies and the capacities that they have. And he kind of speaks of obviously the beginning of that with trying to develop this second body, and he links that with the arising of conscience. Like he says that for the second body to be developed appropriately, there needs to be, like what he says, this arising of conscience in the individual man. And he says that it is there. There is this sort of divine capacity that's been given to man, but he just says it's become screened off, like maybe like partly to do with the conditioning that modern man undergoes, from like his schooling and the form of like collective conditions, but also maybe due to like causes that go way back in history. Maybe man's just evolved that way, or like again he talks about the idea of the Kunda buffer and stuff like that in the past. Says that there was possibly an interference from a higher level that slowed down man's evolution and maybe created unforeseen consequences. That now man has to live in a more sort of conditioned way, or more limited way than is natural to him because of things that went on in the past. So he does say that conscience is there, and somehow or another in his subconsciousness, man needs to kind of start to come in connection with that, and that's what can be a means of direction for him individually, and can provide him with influences like directions or insights or experiences that he individually needs for the growth of his own essence.
Can you just say that bit again? You just broke up on that last sentence.
Well, I'll just say that, like Gurdjieff says that the conscience is present in man in his subconsciousness, and that part of the work is to try to make contact with that consciousness that's already there, so that it can become like a directing influence in the individual man's life and provide him, with insights or directions or experiences that his particular essence, then his individual nature needs. Like conscience may provide may give different direction to different people because their essences then need different kinds of food, different things to develop. Again, there is his idea that our essence is kind of what we're born with, our own particular sort of nature that distinguishes us from another person, and it has particular qualities, you could say, and thereby it needs to receive a certain kind of food to grow,
Well,
and that food will be different to another.
A few weeks ago, I was talking to someone kind of about what you've just said, and he was concerned as to whether, when he was getting, well, I'm not saying he had thoughts in his head or voices in his head, but he was like, am I listening to the right thing inside me? Am I doing the right thing? How do I know it's not the wrong eye trying to direct me down the wrong path? And that kind of stumped me a bit, because I was like, well, the only thing I can explain from my own experience is because I've read the Gurdjieff work and he describes the lessons or the exercises, I kind of feel like I know when something's right.
Mm-hmm.
And if something is wrong, after a while, I suddenly begin, if I'm a bit deluded, perhaps, and think this is the right path. So I don't know if you want to speak on that, because you're saying about being aware and building yourself up, and where are people getting this from? You're saying it's your subconscious. I like to think it's our subconscious coming up, but can our eyes trick us?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's obviously, it does. It does seem certainly possible for that. Like the strange nature of our human consciousness or our human mind, and this kind of multiplicity of consciousness that he talks about, or multiplicity of eyes. By very nature of the form of consciousness that we have as humans, it seems, that we can be deceived or deceive ourselves, and that is it's a classic problem. But then there isn't any simple solution for that, because it's a matter for the individual. If we're saying that this conscience, is individual to the human being, it's in his own subconsciousness, then it's going to be a matter of him coming into contact with that and him making those kind of those judgments himself. I mean, obviously it's beyond it. It's not it's still within the realms of possibility, but it's unlikely that his conscience would perhaps be directing him to act in ways that would be that we would collectively deem as negative. Like, it's probably not going to tell him to go and murder a load of people, or those kind of negative
That
things.
is the
So if
wrong
if
one.
you
Yeah, don't listen to that when it's telling you to go and murder
yeah.
somebody. Because I was wondering if he was looking, he wasn't confident in himself enough.
Yeah,
He's also one of those people, bless him. He keeps asking me for a teacher or to find a teacher, and I'm like, maybe there's none around at the moment. So I think that's what a lot of people are coming up with. They're not feeling secure or confident enough in themselves when they're reading the work that what they're doing is the right thing.
yeah, yeah. Again, that's it's a classic situation of the seeker, and that's part of, you could say, that's part of the benefit of perhaps, like, groups, or teaching teachers, places where you can go and learn, different ideas. Could be the Gurdjieff work, or could be Buddhism or something. That's, part of the benefit is that you can go there, receive some kind of teaching from a certain tradition, and interact, with someone or other people who are interested in it as well. And they can be, there can be help there in the sense of you're interacting with other people and you can get some feedback. But the downside is for that is that you can just become identified. The person can just then believe what the teacher says, or what maybe the feedback they get from other people, and can could lose contact with their own, like, inner guide. So I think that, again, that's a classic problem as humans, and particularly, like, it's not really just limited to seekers, like spiritual, people interested in the spiritual work, but particularly you could say it's heightened in that field, because there always is that tension between accessing our own, let's say, authentic kind of intelligence, or like the inner guide, you could say, and what we receive from other people. So again, there does seem to be a dance that seems to be necessary. Like, again, I suppose they would say that in the beginning you do kind of need to receive. It doesn't, maybe it wouldn't necessarily even have to be a person, like a living person or a physical group, but you do tend to need to receive some kind of material, which could be, ideas or exercises or practices, which then you can apply to yourself. So you're kind of being taught, receiving external material at that level, and you're kind of just following, you could say, the ideas that you're being given, or the exercises or stuff like that. But then, so you need that perhaps for a certain period of time. But then, if that doesn't kind of trigger, like what we're talking about, maybe connection to conscience or some inner kind of intelligence, if it doesn't lead to the stimulation of that, then it's not really going to, you could say, it's not really going to get you anywhere, or the results that come from that, though you might be able to get some results just by practicing some technique that you learned from outside. You might get some results, but again, in the Gurdjieff work, then they talk about, like, wrong crystallization. Like, that's crystallization being the term for a development of a higher body, or particularly the second body then. So yeah, the idea is that those bodies could be developed, but they could be developed in ways that are not, you could say, authentic, or not authentic for you, not really what's needed for you, in which case it would be a kind of an artificial, development, not something that's really satisfying the needs of your essence. And again, in the work, Gurdjieff does talk about that specifically with, like, his term Hasdamus. Says that Hasdamus is someone who's maybe developed one of these higher, or other of these higher bodies to a certain extent, but it's been crystallized incorrectly, so not, like, in tune with the needs of the person, and that there hasn't been this proper, like, connection with conscience there, so that the person can act in ways that maybe they believe might be for the the good, but are just really coming from their own egoism. I mean, you could look at, like, a Hitler or someone like that. Like, they might have fully well believe what they're doing is, like, for the greater good, and they maybe believe that they're getting told that what from God or from higher source that's what they need to do, and yet it can be completely the opposite. So it's a question for each person. But like you were saying,
Sorry, go
I
on.
do think you can develop a kind of taste for it. Like, if you start to receive influences from your subconsciousness, yeah, I do think you can kind of start to recognize the taste of it, rather than, like, you can learn to differentiate that between let's just say, maybe your own machinations, or what we could think perhaps of, like, the ego or stuff like that. But yeah, that position of the seeker is classic, that they can have the desire for development or for doing good, but they often lack, you could say, confidence in themselves, because there is that state of inner division, Again, I think Gurdjieff talks about it as part of almost as part of a product of our conditioning as kids, Like he does tend to say that as kids, we are a bit more in tune with our essence, very young kids. And we haven't really received much in the way of what he calls personality, which is kind of like, personality is the side of us that's more kind of external, you could say, and is more to do with like navigating the physical world and our social interactions with other people and learning basic intelligence to navigate the world, like what we're supposed to learn in school, I guess. But he does say that we tend to lose that connection with our essence because of the way that modern man does get educated, and that he tends to become like separated from himself and doubting himself, because there becomes that conflict of interest between like all the ideas that he's learned, but like maybe his parents tell him he should be this way or that way, and what the conflict between what he's told he should be and maybe what is these natural tendencies of his essence, So because that begins at such a young,
because I see so much of that in life, and I see how people's peers have tried to push them the way they want them to go, and they're not letting that person be who they really should be.
And because that can happen at such a young age. I mean, it may vary slightly, with different people, but if it happens at a really young age, it's going to be hard for, like, when the person becomes an adult, it's going to be hard for them to then be able to discriminate between like all the ideas that they've acquired of like these ideas of morality, or what they should be doing for an occupation, or I don't know, this, that, and the other, and what they were actually born with, like. So he does say that the conscience is more, what is in the subconsciousness is more tied to our essence. It's more tied to, like, say, those little that bag of tendencies, you could say, qualities or characteristics that we were born with that are naturally ours. Now, that doesn't mean that the essence is just all goodness as we would normally think of, like in the concept of good. It can have its own, quote unquote, positive and negative tendencies, but the difference is that they are our own. Like some essence may be naturally impatient, perhaps, that could just be part of its nature, and whereas another essence might be very generous, but again, the value in that is the essence is our own, and that's the only sort of authentic side of us, and there can only be like, real growth would have to be authentic growth, it couldn't just be a grafting on of like external behaviors, like pretend, learn these ways to, like, maybe I'm impatient, and then someone tells me I shouldn't be impatient, and so then I'm just trying not to be, impatient, but that just becomes an external. Again, that could create an inner conflict, when I'm just trying to regulate my behavior in some fashion, rather than actually dealing with you could say, the cause of the impatience, or getting to the essence of it,
Because we're trying to find our true selves. We're trying to be as real as possible, which is why we're doing this Gurdjieff work and finding the light within us, trying not to fall into these black holes. Because Gurdjieff himself,
well, I mean, like,
if it's heavy, it's bringing it down.
Well, that's the advantage, the essence there is that's, though it may have, somebody's essence may have like positive or negative qualities to it, that's what's given to us to work. That's what's given to each person to work with. Do you see what I mean? There can be pros and cons, but that is what they have been given to work with, and in a sense, that essence holds holds the key, you could say, to their development. Like if they can actually get in touch with that, and that becomes the kind of, sort of dominating influence or guiding influence in their life, if they can actually sort of live their essence, rather than just like that being obscured by all these ideas that the personality and the personality taking over, so they would just be living like a foreign, an artificial life. If they can actually live naturally, then that you could say that would automatically kind of bring conscience to the fore, because they would be if they're living from their essence, then you could whatever conditions they come up against would be naturally what they need to work with, for their own essence. So if they can stimulate the essence, or if they can reclaim it, like he does say that in one sense the work is not necessarily about developing anything new, but it's kind of being able to reclaim what has been lost, reclaim the kind of childlike condition. If they can reclaim it, then you could say automatically their life would become their teacher, because they would be moved into certain situations because of their essence, their characteristics of their own essence. And then you could say they would meet the consequences of their actions would naturally serve as a fuel for teaching them. It doesn't necessarily mean it would be like always pleasant or not, but at least it would be real. It would be a real consequence of their essence, rather than like them just living at the surface level of their like personality.
You are beginning to break up, Josh, just in them last bits. So I wonder if we should just bring this to an end, because I don't know if the internet connection's getting a bit shitty. Oh,
yeah.
okay, yeah. We've got that last bit, but it was a bit beginning to turn into a Dalek.
Okay.
Do you want to just say where your WordPress is?
Yeah, the WordPress site is called the Tapestry of Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff and the Work. And I think if you type in Gurdjieff and Beelzebub, like .wordpress, that should take you to it.
Or even just Tapestry. Tapestry of Beelzebub brings it in. So
that might do it. That might do it.
I'm going to thank you very much, Josh. We'll have to do this again when we've got better internet connection. And thank everyone for listening. Hopefully you've all got the main points. It was only the last few sentences that you started going all weird on. Let me let me end the show here. Thank you very much. Stay on so we can just
thank you, Denny.
the last few minutes. Thank you for watching, everybody.